Hey, I want to thank you for watching my video today. Today we're going to continue our series on the Sermon on the Mount. As I've shared with you before, the Sermon on the Mount is Jesus' proclamation that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. The kingdom of heaven is here. Jesus begins the Sermon on the Mount by talking about the Beatitudes, which I shared with you last week. And the Beatitudes are the blessings of those who have become citizens of heaven, who have put their faith in Jesus Christ. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for they will inherit the kingdom of heaven. Every one of us who realizes our need for something more, our need for Jesus Christ, our need for salvation, will then inherit the kingdom of heaven. And as individuals who have put our faith in Jesus Christ and inherited the kingdom of heaven, we then are called to duty. And the second message in there that I actually had as a first in our series here is that we are called to be salt and light. We are called to be salt in preserving the kingdom of heaven. And we are called to be light to proclaim the kingdom of heaven, to be God's ambassadors here on earth. Today, I want to talk to you about a subject that some are going to struggle with because many people think that Jesus came to abolish the law, that in Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, the Old Testament has no credence on our lives anymore, that we no longer have to read, understand, or know the Old Testament laws because they are obsolete. But that is not what Jesus says. In verse 17 of Matthew chapter 5, this is exactly what Jesus said. He said, "Don't think that I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth have passed away, not the smallest letter or one stroke of a letter will pass away from the law until all things are accomplished." Jesus came to earth not to abolish the law. In fact, he was accused of that many times, but the reality is this. There is only one person who has ever lived on this earth who completely obeyed the law, who was never guilty of even one sin, and that's Jesus Christ. Jesus lived every day of his life obedient to the law. He did not come to abolish the law. He came to fulfill the law. And he fulfilled it not only by living a perfect life, but he fulfilled it by becoming our substitution. He who had no sin became the sin for all of us. Every sin that I commit today and tomorrow and the next day, every sin that's ever been committed since the time of Adam and Eve, Jesus Christ carried on the cross. He took our punishment. And if we put our faith in Jesus Christ, then we can be citizens, we can be the beneficiaries of that great gift. But it doesn't mean that the law is meant to be abolished. In fact, Jesus is very clear, and the writers in the New Testament are very clear. The law is important. The law is good. The law was never intended to bring us to righteousness. It was intended to show us that we lack righteousness. From Adam and Eve all the way through the Old Testament, every person who was declared righteous was not declared righteous because of their obedience to the law, but because of the recognition of their own flaws. They put their faith in the promise of Jesus Christ. From the very beginning, those who were declared right put their faith in the promise of Jesus Christ. Now, does that mean that the law is no good? No, it doesn't mean that the law is no good, because the law is our guardian. The law is as I said on Sunday morning, the law are the bumpers at the bowling alley. They keep us towards the right path. They cannot in themselves, because they don't have the authority, they don't have the ability because of our own sin. They cannot guide us all the way into heaven, but they can guide us to Jesus Christ. The law was intended to show us our sin. The law was intended to show us our absolute lack of righteousness. And that's what it did. And today, for those who say the Old Testament doesn't matter, that the laws of the Old Testament don't matter, are wrong. There are 613 laws in the Old Testament. They are important for us today as believers in Jesus Christ, just as they were important to the Jews in Jesus' time. It doesn't mean that by being obedient to those 613 laws that we somehow find a miraculous way into heaven. No, by listening to and trying to be obedient to those laws, we recognize our sinfulness and we turn to Jesus Christ and his righteousness. When I die and go to heaven, my righteousness is not going to get me in. I am putting my faith in the righteousness of Jesus Christ. The only person who was born and died without a single sin. But again, that doesn't mean that we throw away the Old Testament. In fact, if you know somebody out there who says, oh, you don't have to obey that because that's from the Old Testament. Jesus is very clear as he goes on, and he says in verse 19, therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commands and teaches others to do so will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. It doesn't mean that you necessarily lose your salvation. If you have accepted Jesus Christ, you still will find the kingdom of heaven, but you miss the opportunity to be great in it. See, if we abolish, if we destroy, if we get rid of the laws in the Old Testament, the 10 commandments, by the way, of the 10 commandments, 9 of them are written about in the New Testament as something that we should be doing. The only one that isn't is to keep the Sabbath day holy. The other 9 commandments are in the New Testament as directives for how we should live our lives. So we need to live by them. To discard some because we don't like them or discard some because they make us uncomfortable is to lose the impact of what they were intended to do. It was designed to point to our sin, so in return, we would look to Christ's righteousness. We would put our faith in him and not in our own abilities. So don't think that Jesus came to destroy or abolish the law. And don't ever, I'm being very clear here, follow anyone who tells you that the Old Testament commands are of no significance today, because even Jesus Christ himself said they are. Put your faith in Jesus. Read both his words in the Old Testament and the New Testament so you can fully understand what it is to be a citizen of heaven and how to live our lives. Hey, if you watch this video to the end, I encourage you to hit like and subscribe or follow us on the different channels that you see us in. Please make sure to leave a comment, because through leaving comments and liking and subscribing, again, you help us to get this video to be seen by more and more people as the algorithms show on that. I do this to try to reach people with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Hey, and if you're in the Sandwich area this Sunday, I encourage you to come and join us at 10 a.m. as we continue the Sermon on the Mount so that you can learn what it is to be a citizen of heaven, to be a child of God.